But now we came out to a sparse forest, not as dense as before. This forest had a gentle slope, and it was here that we had to stop because we encountered many bamboo spike traps and numerous interwoven tripwires. Mixed in were all sorts of cleverly laid mines on old, unused trails. Long abandoned pit traps had collapsed at the mouth, leaving wide, gaping holes. After a discussion, we agreed to turn back along the old path, escape this minefield, and head in a different direction. Around 5 o'clock in the afternoon, we stopped to rest in that forest. At that time, I, along with 2 men from my reconnaissance team, the battalion reconnaissance officer, and a few infantrymen, went down to the foot of the hill where the slope was gentle to find water. We discovered a dry stream with only a small trickle of water flowing. We followed the trickle to find a larger pool of standing water to collect water. Right near the water pool, we saw a trail on the other side of the stream. We had to split up, both guarding and collecting water. After we had collected the water, we left a team of 4 men to stay behind and set up an ambush with an RPD for support. The rest of us returned to the resting place to lead the others down for water. As we led the others back near the water source, we suddenly heard a long, continuous burst of gunfire. We quickly rushed to the ambush position. The ambush and the missing comrade. When we arrived, we sent a few comrades forward to check, and they found 1 dead enemy soldier. He had been hit by around 10 bullets, and his body was mangled. He was wearing a uniform made of buffalo hide fabric and a baseball cap, just like the soldiers of P.5. A nickname for an enemy leader. On his feet were a pair of new high-top boots. The ambush team then recounted that shortly after our group left, 2 men were seen cautiously coming down to the stream. From afar, seeing them wearing green clothes, they initially suspected they were our soldiers and held their fire. It was only when one of them bent down to crawl under a fallen tree that our soldiers realized they were not our troops. The cap he was wearing made them pause, and when they opened fire, it was a long burst. We followed the blood trail to look for the one who escaped, but we didn't know where he ran. We gave up the pursuit because it was getting dark and we had too few men. I and the others recovered 1 AK rifle and collected water before returning to the resting place. After many days on the mission deep in the forest, our health was deteriorating rapidly. The enemy was nowhere to be found, only occasionally running into small groups of 2 or 3 men. But due to fatigue and overconfidence, we failed to eliminate almost anyone. They were very quick at slipping into the jungle. A lost comrade and a fateful encounter. On one sweep, we found 3 Honga trucks, enemy communication vehicles hidden in the forest. It was noon and the sky was cloudy, signaling heavy rain. We stopped for lunch. The trucks were brand new, but the tires had been slashed by the Pol Pot forces. After lunch, seeing that the trucks were unusable, we decided to destroy them and prepared to leave. Suddenly, a burst of gunfire rang out. We returned fire with a few bursts. We heard the 5th Company shouting loudly. I ran over and saw that one of our soldiers had been killed by the enemy's gunfire. They only fired 1 burst and then fled headlong, and unfortunately 1 bullet found its mark. After performing the funeral rites for the fallen soldier, we continued our mission, and the deceased soldier was carried along with us until the unit returned to its base camp. The next day, we encountered the enemy again. This time they couldn't escape. They were eliminated, but 1 man was lucky to survive. The 8th Battalion's medic was so angry that he rushed up and beat the prisoner severely, seemingly wanting to avenge the fallen soldier. Additional context from the division staff here. Hoa Chien asks permission to add some supplementary information from Mr. Van Thang, the staff officer of Division 341. From May to September, the regiments and battalions continuously rotated in sweeping operations covering a wide area of up to hundreds of square kilometers. The regiments at that time, Regiment 273 advanced from the south of Phu, sat towards Battambang, penetrating about 25 kilometers into the Cardamom Mountains, Cravan. By the end of September 1979, they stopped in Mong Rasi District, Battambang Province to establish local governance. Meanwhile, Regiment 266 and Regiment 270 continued to advance deep into the Cardamom Mountains, close to the Cambodia-Thailand border, destroying and clearing out the enemy bases in Phum Se, Phum Kam, Non Phum Elfit and Phum, at the end of Route 56 near the Cambodia-Thailand border. On the way to the Son, Regiment 270 eliminated and persuaded to surrender over 150 Pol Pot soldiers, including a man named Sophip, the battalion commander of Regiment 53 unit, one of the Pol Pot forces. Through the interrogation of Sofiep, we learned about a few other regiments' weak spots. When asked about the division headquarters, he said that a battalion-level officer like himself didn't know. Sofiep also said he heard his colleagues of the same rank mention a mock. Based on Sofiep's assessment, Tamok was still operating in this region. Tamok used an elephant for mobility. His elephant often followed mountain ridges and ravines, sometimes walking along the stream banks to use the rain and stream water to wash away its tracks. At night, he slept on the elephant's back and never stayed in the same spot with the elephant on consecutive nights. In other areas, civilians who fled to the liberated zones also said they didn't know Tamok, but they saw a loot from a high-ranking official riding an elephant pass through a few days or sometimes just a few hours earlier. This sounded plausible, so our soldiers continued to search and pursue. They followed the elephant tracks, sometimes losing the trail for kilometers only for the footprints to reappear on the opposite bank of a stream, along with partially erased traces of extinguished fires. The pursuit was like a children's game of hide-and-seek, costing countless hours of effort and dozens of days of travel deep in the forest. We lacked rice and were hungry. Sometimes the rain lasted so long that we couldn't cook, and the dried rations we carried were also depleted. Despite going far, we didn't encounter the enemy. This led to a sense of complacency, and when unexpectedly running into the enemy, we reacted awkwardly, resulting in casualties. We also had to carry the wounded while marching, and in cases of severe injuries that required transporting to the regimental medical station, we had to dedicate significant manpower, sometimes an entire 15-man platoon, to carry them back, a journey that took many days. This went on for months. News of a monk suddenly appeared through technical radio intelligence rumors from prisoners of war and Cambodian displaced civilians, elephant footprints, freshly broken branches, and recently extinguished embers, only to vanish again for dozens of kilometers in the intense hunt by the officers and soldiers of Division 341. Regiment 266 alone continuously swept the base area for over 2 months. The above information, general in nature, from Mr. Van Thang helps us to gain a clearer overview of the sweeping operations across the vast Leash Forest by Mr. Kwang's unit. Now please continue listening to the memoir of Mr. Tran Ngoc Kwang. In the Leash Forest, our comrades along with allied units swept back and forth numerous times, but there were still small groups of Pol Pot remnants lurking in the jungle. And every time we turned on the radio to work, we would run into the enemy's radio, jamming our signal. They even spoke Vietnamese to challenge us, which made our communications personnel very frustrated and angry, but they still didn't know where the enemy was. The mountains and forest were vast, and endless human strength was limited, and then there were the wounded and the fallen, and the essential need for sufficient rations and food to maintain the strength needed for the mission. One day while on the march, it was early in the afternoon. The sky was gloomy and overcast, signaling that the jungle rains were about to pour down. We tried to march a little further to find a stream to stop at. We discovered several of the enemy's abandoned VTN trucks hidden under the thorny bamboo bushes along the dense stream, but just like before, the tires had all been destroyed by them. We couldn't do anything about it because we were far from the base, and with ruined tires, how could we bring them back? We stayed there for one night. The next morning we destroyed the trucks and continued the sweep. An ambush and a heavy downpour one afternoon, we advanced into a village farm. According to the map, this village was about 15 kilometers from the 8th Battalion's base, as the crow flies, but because it was still raining, we didn't go any further and decided to rest here. If the rain stopped, we would head straight back to the 8th Battalion. If the rain was still heavy, we would stay here overnight. While resting, we organized our formation to guard against a Pol Pot attack. Our reconnaissance team and the battalion's headquarters staff covered one direction. Parallel to us was the 5th Company's position. In front of us was an open field about 400 or 500 meters wide. The edge of the forest was on the other side. As our comrades were setting up their resting place and cooking, we spotted a group of about 10 enemy soldiers advancing into the village where we were. Because they were far away and the sky was dark, we couldn't clearly tell if they were friendly or enemy, but we were ready and waiting. Meanwhile, that group of people continued to move closer. The comrades of the 5th Company also spotted them. At that moment, they were walking straight toward us, so some of the 5th Company soldiers moved through the village to support us. Our weapons at the time, besides the axe, included several RPDs. The enemy still hadn't detected us. When they came within about 100 meters of the edge of the village, The lead man suddenly stopped and pointed at the village, and the whole group scattered and ran. But at the same moment our guns opened fire. From the 5th Company's side, the heavy machine gun also barked in bursts, and we and the 5th Company soldiers rushed out to chase the enemy. The shouts of pursuing the enemy echoed across a corner of the forest. As I ran past, I saw 3 dead enemy bodies lying there. Further away, about 10 to 15 meters, one man who was wounded was trying to crawl toward the forest, but a following soldier didn't give him a chance. We chased them up to the edge of the forest and then stopped because we lost sight of them. Following the tracks where the grass had been crushed, we discovered one more wounded man hiding in the thick bushes. And on the other side, the 5th Company also found one wounded man hiding. We acted like machines, just finishing the humanitarian task for them by giving them 1 round. After that, we didn't continue the search but fired into the bushes. The rain was getting heavier now. The downpour was like pouring water from a bucket. We were soaked to the bone and returned to our resting place. Meanwhile, the soldiers of the 5th Company came back later because they had to perform an extra task, ensuring each dead body received 1 final round, just in case they were pretending to be dead. The next morning, before returning to the 8th Battalion's position, we had to sweep the area in front of the outpost 1 more time. Around noon, we reached the 8th Battalion's outpost. The reconnaissance comrades who had stayed behind at the base had dug up cassava to treat us to a meal. This was because behind the 8th Battalion's base, there was a cassava field the enemy had planted, but hadn't harvested yet. Now the 8th Battalion had taken over that cassava field and would dig it up to boil and eat whenever they were free. That afternoon, the men from our 20th Company arrived back at the unit. At the same time, the teams that had gone with the other battalions also began to return. Rest rations and training after a few days of rest on from thy being, and I went to a village near the regiment to ask for tobacco to smoke, because for days of marching we had resorted to smoking of thuo leaves, mulberry leaves, and corn silk. The Cambodian people in this village must have had pity on our soldiers or something. We just pointed at the tobacco plant and held out our hands to ask. The villagers immediately said okay. Despite the language barrier at that time, he and I pointed only to the old leaves, leaving the young ones for the villagers. Soldiers and civilians are like fish and water. The 2 of us carried 2 tight handfuls back to the unit to feed the starving pipes lying in wait at the base. We had nothing to trade. The soldiers then were ragged and looked exactly like jungle ghosts. After a few days of rest, the political officers did not forget their duty, which was to study more, and study forever. Speaking of this, I hope the political cadres don't get angry with me. This subject, honestly, I dreaded the most. Then we had to go up to the 8th Battalion again to practice shooting target 1. I don't remember when the target was raised. I only know that at this firing range I had a difficult-to-forget memory. I nearly lost my head while acting as the target marker. A few rounds went off in the first burst, then the gun jammed. Waiting for the jam to be cleared, I looked up just as a next burst of ammunition slammed right into the edge of the bunker. That was a close call. Then we continued to carry out the mission with the 8th Battalion to familiarize ourselves with the terrain, starting from the front of the 5th Company's outpost, marching along the logging road. After passing the collapsed bridge for about 3 kilometers, we entered P.5 Division 10, as we called it. At that point, we split into 2 wings and began to sweep the village. This village had many stilt houses, but they had been abandoned for a long time. Occasionally, small enemy groups still returned here. We swept the area in 1 circle and searched the stilt houses. There was no sign of the enemy, only flies, so many flies that we had to use mosquito nets when we ate. The lost soldier and the second ambush, while sitting and resting waiting for our comrades, we suddenly saw a person walking out of the forest ahead, calling out. We were on alert. It turned out to be our own soldier. Later we learned it was a soldier from the 10th Division who had been lost in the jungle for several days with only 1 handful of packed rice left. This new soldier, who spoke with a northern accent, still had a relatively new uniform and boots. Our comrades brought him in to eat and then transferred him to the transport unit for care. This is the very reason why we named that village P.5 Division 10. After directing the lost soldier from the 10th Division back to the 8th Battalion's base, we continued our march. We had about 300 meters left to reach the truck village, the village where we found the enemy's hidden trucks. The 2 wings organized a wide perimeter sweep along the edge of the forest. At that time, the reconnaissance officer of the 8th Battalion was leading 1 wing. He suddenly saw 2 hands raise up from a hole under a clump of thick trees in the jungle. Startled, he immediately reacted with a burst of bullets. The two hands raised even higher, and when we rushed to the scene, two more hands were raised, and at the same time their loudspeaker continuously broadcast a message that at the time we only understood the two words, "Chua Corn surrender." Ah, so they were saying they were civilians, enemy and civilian are one. Take them all. Seeing them hungry faces, gaunt clothes, tattered and stinking like owls, we mixed them a packet of watered-down dried rice to temporarily relieve their hunger, then handed them over to the battalion's transport unit. We then continued our march. Victory and looting. After passing the truck village for about 2 kilometers, we turned left to continue our mission. 2 days passed without encountering any enemy. One morning, the fog in the jungle had not completely dispersed. We and the enemy spotted each other from a distance. Before we could even open fire, they had already slipped into the forest and disappeared. At noon, we were resting in the middle of our march on a cart path in the forest. While resting, we saw a squad of enemy soldiers advancing towards us from ahead. They numbered about 8 to 10 men. We immediately signaled for our comrades behind to spread out on both sides of the road. Meanwhile, the enemy squad was still unaware that their end was near. When they were about 70 meters from us, the lead man probably spotted our comrades in the rear looking up to observe. The whole group scattered and ran away. At that very moment, our guns roared. 2 RPDs, positioned on both flanks on a high termite mound, poured ammunition into their formation. Only 2 men at the very back, who split and ran in 2 different directions, managed to escape. We chased them for a little while, then turned back towards our position. The enemy also fired a few bursts back, but they were harmless. The other pursuit team following the blood trail finished off the wounded ones. Thus we had eliminated a total of 6 men and captured 5 guns, 2 pots and a few old stinking artifacts. We emptied the ammunition from the guns and gave them to the 2 Pol Pot prisoners to carry. Additionally, we threw in some old relics as a bonus. They were overjoyed, just like children receiving Lunar New Year gifts. Return and change of command, we continued our march. Looking at the map, we saw a village about 7 or 8 kilometers ahead. We tried to reach it to seek shelter from the rain and stay overnight, but given how spread out we weren't sure if we would arrive before dark. We did manage to arrive in time. Ahead, we could see the outline of the village edge, but on the road leading into the village, we saw a group of people walking in. It was a group of Cambodian refugees fleeing the jungle, but we remained highly vigilant. We split into 2 wings and advanced deep into the edges of the road, then rushed in. The civilians were surprised and panicked, constantly shouting "Chua Chon, Chua Chon." Seeing the group of people who were tattered and starving, consisting only of the elderly women and children, with no possessions other than a bundle of clothes draped over their shoulders, looking truly pitiful, we shared a small amount of rice and a few packets of emergency dried rice with them. We then directed them to stay on the other side of the village, as this village was quite large and almost divided into 2 by a field. On this side there were only about 7 or 8 houses. On the other side there were more. We set up camp in the smaller part of the village, prepared to rest, and cooked our meal. That night it rained very heavily. The comrades on guard duty had to be extremely vigilant against the enemy and the civilians on the other side, who knows what they might do. Eventually the sounds of the civilians gradually quieted down, returning the Leash Mountains and forest to a gloomy and silent space. Upon completing this sweeping mission and returning to the unit, we heard a verbal rumor among the soldiers that the unit was about to be transferred back to the north. This was like a breath of fresh air for us soldiers. At the same time, the unit selected some comrades to form a new unit for supporting local governance for the friendly nation. The comrades who were transferred to the task of building local governance were saddened. After a few days of rest, the officers held a meeting to disseminate the order. The next morning, we would pack up and move the unit. The next morning, I quickly packed my gear and marched out to the regimental headquarters. There we saw a VTN truck waiting. We boarded the truck and drove out to Leash, then took Route 56 toward the PT intersection. This was the place where our regiment had dealt decisive blows to the Pol Pot forces when they tried to attack Phu Sat. It was also here that many of our beloved comrades had fallen. Phu Sat had now revived. The lives of the people were bustling and lively. At the intersection that met Route 5, turning right led to Phnom Penh and turning left led to Battambang. Our truck turned left. The reconnaissance soldiers in the truck were silent, no longer whispering. The paved road was quite good and the truck drove quickly. In the afternoon, around a little past 4 o'clock, We arrived at Battambang City. The truck dropped us off in an empty space with a few rows of houses that looked like a market. Across a high dividing wall there was a tall building. We didn't know which unit was stationed there. The soldiers of this unit were probably spoiled soldiers because they were dressed and behaved very neatly, not looking messy like the jungle ghosts we were. From here across the road was the Battambang River. This was where the Cambodian children had once borrowed a pot from our platoon and never returned it after we gave them leftover rice. As a result, the next morning we had nothing to cook with, so I had to go to a friendly unit to borrow a pot for cooking and then forgot to return it to them too. That evening we had a feast of the eye candy which we traded with the Cambodian civilians for rice and miscellaneous items, including 50,000 dong banknotes from the former South Vietnamese regime. Continuing the mission to the border the next morning, we continued our march along Route 10 toward the Palin border gate. At noon, our entire unit turned left about 1 kilometer into a low hill with a lot of elephant grass and stopped to set up camp. When we crossed a small stream on the other side was an orange grove. There were many orange trees, but the fruit was all gone. We searched all afternoon and only found a few fruits. At that time, one of our platoons was ordered to march toward Palin for a mission. Around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, we stopped to rest within the outpost formation of an infantry company. I don't remember which unit it belonged to. There were very few soldiers from that unit at home then, because they were out on sweeping operations. Notably, I saw that the comrades in this unit all used wicker baskets, like those used by ethnic minorities, to hold their gear and ammunition. That night, we asked the friendly unit to assign us one direction to guard. After some initial refusal, the friendly unit finally agreed to let us take one direction for the night watch. Behind us was the friendly unit's mortar crew, who fired about 10 rounds for sentry duty. Perhaps only 6 or 7 of them exploded. Maybe they were US-made mortar rounds that had expired. The next morning, our entire platoon continued its mission, marching past the stream near the base camp on the left side. We went deep into the forest until about 10 a.m. when we finished crossing the dense jungle. The brothers stopped to rest, to continue climbing the mountain. This mountain did not look very high, but there were many trees and it was very dense with many vines, so it was difficult to walk when we reached the middle of the mountain slope. We encountered a turtle as big as a pith helmet, so the brothers turned to discuss with the platoon leader, saying, "Let us go back, because if you meet a snake you go, but if you meet a turtle you return." After a while of discussion, we agreed to return when we got back near the outpost of the friendly unit. But at the stream section above, we discovered on this bank there were a few temporary sheds roofed with corrugated iron, but no people were seen crossing the stream. We cut a corner toward the front of the friendly unit's outpost. When we arrived, the brothers in the outpost stared wide-eyed because we had just walked through their minefield. We were trembling and scared out of our wits because we were subjective, thinking we were near the unit, so we were not vigilant. Luckily, no one triggered a mine. We stopped to rest there until the next morning before returning to the unit. On the way back, we met the brothers of the friendly unit, just returning from a sweep. That afternoon, we arrived at the unit on this abandoned road. The direct subordinate units of the Regiment and Battalion 7 were also gathering here, knowing that Hugh, a soldier in Battalion 7 who was my compatriot, was nearby. I rushed to him immediately without even washing up. The two of us met and were talking lively when suddenly, in the direction of my unit's camp, an explosion rang out in war. That sound was normal like any other time, but a while later, when I returned to the unit, I was stunned to learn that Trung, nicknamed Trung Cup, because one of his ears was deformed and curved inward, so we called him that for convenience, had sacrificed his life. He had finished cooking rice and went to a bamboo clump to cut a pair of cooking chopsticks when he triggered a mine planted under the bamboo clump. At that time, the brothers were washing and shrouding him, staying here for a few days. One day our scouts were ordered to go ahead to lead the way for a company of Battalion 7 to start marching into Samlot village. This was like an advance party for the whole regiment. I do not remember how long it took us to get there. One noon, we reached the Sanka River where there was a bridge crossing it, but now it had been completely blown up. Lying in the riverbed at that time, the infantry soldiers deployed on this side of the stream bank to protect us scouts crossing first. After crossing to the other riverbank, we immediately spread out the formation to protect the bridgehead for the units. Seeing no enemy after the whole formation had crossed the stream, we continued marching until the afternoon. At about 4 or 5 p.m., the entire unit had arrived at this side of a small stream. Located at the edge of Samlot village on this road axis, we saw 2 spike pits that had collapsed. The covering part was gone, leaving only the pit below with spikes Bristling when we entered the village, we saw in the middle of the village there was already a friendly unit of about a company holding the position around the outpost. The brothers had cleared the vegetation about 70 to 100 meters wide for easy observation. In this Samnot village, there were many areca and coconut trees in the middle was a road connecting from the Andong intersection to here. On both sides of the road were 2 rows of stilt houses roofed with iron. That night we rested at the entrance of the village about 300 meters from the friendly unit's outpost because we arrived when it was already dark and could not find water to cook rice. Some soldiers climbed up to cut down coconut bunches to drink and used the coconut water to cook rice, but I do not understand why cooking rice with coconut water made the rice hard and undercooked, so that whole night we had to eat dried rice and dry rations. Some brothers were too tired from marching, so after drinking the coconut water, they used the rest to wash their faces and limbs, so that night they could not sleep, because their limbs and faces were sticky and uncomfortable. The next morning, a team of ours, along with then the deputy regiment commander, went on a mission to inspect the area in front of the friendly unit's outpost. At that time, 2 soldiers from the friendly unit guided us. After passing the outpost by about 1 kilometer, we encountered a dry stream here. We saw several pot bodies destroyed by the friendly unit a few days ago, now decomposing and emitting a very unpleasant smell. After crossing the stream was a trail. On this trail we saw spike pits mixed with rock traps, just like those of the ethnic people in our Central Highlands during the war against the Americans. Generally during this period, there were very few mines in this area. By late afternoon, we returned to the unit. The regiment's formation was now arranged. Our scout company 20 was stationed right in front of the regiment headquarters, spread out in a horizontal line in a banana forest. There were many bananas here at that time. Because we were lazy to dig fortifications, we cut down banana trees and tied them together to make a shelter to stay temporarily here. While searching, we discovered a water celery field in front. So in our daily meals we had the additional dish of stir-fried water celery, which was very delicious. As for ripe bananas and banana soup, honestly, there were too many to count. One night, while sleeping soundly, suddenly a burst of gunfire rang out. Sleeping soundly by reflex, I jumped into the fortification and fired a few aimless shots, but saw nothing. While later a few military police soldiers from the regiment arrived carrying B-41 heavy weapons. They asked us if the enemy had entered. Oh my God, there was no enemy. It turned out to be some nocturnal animals foraging, startled and running around, and our nervous soldiers thought the enemy was entering, so they opened fire. Our company 20 had been here for a while when another unit came to station with our regiment. There was Regiment 250. Through inquiry, I learned that in this regiment there were many soldiers from Vinj City, and I even found a few guys I studied with in secondary school. Especially there were a few guys from the same neighborhood, and 2 guys had just sacrificed their lives. They were Ngo Trong Kwai and Dang Kak Dung in Company 6 Battalion 2 of Regiment 250. During this period, the direct subordinate companies were located within the regiment's position, while our Scout Company 20 was also temporarily staying there, waiting for the teams going on terrain missions to return. One day our platoon conducted a field survey. That day, Mr. Enga, the deputy company commander, was in charge, leading us in the direction of the Cambodian-Thai border to find a large stream on the map to serve as a stationing position for the infantry units. Spending several days struggling in the forest, we finally found the stream. Later, the deputy company commander told us it was wrong, because the large stream was still about 1 kilometer away. Much later, when the map was redefined, we led the infantry companies of Battalion 8 to the correct position on the map. Because it was a new terrain area, we were very cautious while marching on the way back. Passing a logging road, suddenly we saw a pot soldier lying on the road. Seeing us, he hurriedly raised both hands high to surrender. To be exact, that was not a human, but a walking skeleton wrapped in clothes, torn to shreds like a bundle of rags. Because there was no communication intelligence in this new position, we had to take him back for the officers in the rear to interrogate. On the way back, we were stuck with this guy, so the marching speed slowed down a bit when crossing a deep stream. We signaled him to take off all his clothes to wade across, and he answered us in Vietnamese. Well, it turned out this prisoner knew how to speak Vietnamese very well. After finishing lunch, we continued marching, so the prisoner opened his mouth and chatted continuously with the escort soldiers until late afternoon. We arrived at the outpost of Battalion 7 without enough time to stop and visit my compatriots. We went straight to the regiment headquarters. After handing the prisoner over to the regiment's military police, we returned to the company's stationing position. I would also like to add a bit that during this time the enemy and mines in this area were very few, so every time we went on field surveys we were very comfortable. Much later, when the units had stabilized their stationing positions, our Scout Company 20 also moved to a new position which was a stream confluence located about 7 or 8 kilometers from the regiment headquarters behind us. About 4 or 5 kilometers was the position of Engineer Company 17 on this trail. Every time we passed here, the brothers had to hold their breath and cover their noses to run fast to escape the smell of dead bodies, because on both sides of the road there were several pot bodies destroyed lying on some stilt shacks, currently decomposing in front of our unit. Was the outpost of the 120mm Mortar Company 14 at that time, the formation of Battalion 8 of Regiment 266, along with a battalion of Regiment 250, had spread out to the Thai-Cambodian border. After stabilizing the positions, the unit began assigning teams to search in front of the stationing area. Besides mission times, we went shooting fish in the stream to improve our diet. I still remember one day Dwan, a guy from the bin, and I were absorbed in shooting fish and had gone about 2 kilometers from the unit when we detected the smell of death. The two of us stopped to search and saw on the stream bank several enemy bodies. We did not know which unit had destroyed them, so we slipped away. It was only peaceful for a while before the enemy began to be breathed life into by their sponsors, so they started coming back to harass the units. They planted mines and attacked the outposts. Up front, we started to have casualties, so at this time the outposts on the road became transit stations. At this time our unit sent teams on missions continuously to find enemy bases. During those missions we sometimes captured prisoners. One day Dawn and I received a mission to go up front to escort prisoners back to the regiment. This time the prisoners were 2 female pot soldiers. They were swollen with edema, so they walked very slowly. Not until the afternoon did we arrive at Company 17. After handing the 2 prisoners over to Company 17, we returned to the unit. It was already dark. The 2 of us tried to get back in time in the forest at night. The road was very difficult to walk, having to fumble along the telephone wire. Until 9 p.m. did we finally arrive at the place. Part 2 of the Memoir of a Scout Soldier by author Tran Ngo Quang asks permission to pause here. Sincerely thank you for taking the time to follow. If you find it interesting, please remember to click subscribe to support the channel and follow the next parts. Once again, sincerely thank you and goodbye, friends.